5 things to consider when you start your raised garden bed project. The first thing you want to consider is sunlight, as most of the vegetables you're going to be growing need at least 6 hours of full sunlight. And that could be any time of the day. So in the space that you plan on setting up your raised garden bed, watch as the light travels through the day. You also want to be able to track that light as it will shift throughout the year as well. Keep in mind any structures around your area, such as fences and buildings and trees, as those are going to create shade, different patterns, different times during the day, different times during the year. The second thing you want to consider is water. Not only accessibility to water, but the cost of watering your entire system. So as you can see here, we have an automated drip irrigation system. So we ran a pipe underground from our house access to this area because we knew this is where we were going to have a raised garden bed. We have a timer system, and then we have drip irrigation ran throughout our raised garden bed system here. So that way it's going to water the right amount of water right at the root level, so that way it'll avoid evaporation, thus lowering our costs and lowering our work as it's going to do it for us. The third thing to consider is your traffic plan and your accessibility. You want to be able to access all of your raised garden bed from any location. So as you can see here, we have a center aisle, and that is utilized to access all sides of our beds. However, we can also access our beds from the outside of our garden, as we made sure to allow space for bodies, such as mine, to go all the way around. All right, so now that you've figured out where your sunlight is going to hit your garden, how to get water to your garden, and that everything is easily accessible, it's time to talk design. So as you can see, as I'm standing here in our space, one of the things that we used to determine what our design was going to look like was height. So as you can see, this is pretty much waist height. That way, all my vegetables, all my plants are easily accessible without me having to stoop over. This was a really important part of our design, as we wanted to make it easier on our bodies to work in our garden full time. The second thing we needed to consider, besides height, was width. We wanted to make sure that we could access all of our garden without having to put extra strain on our body. And so these two dimensions, the height and the width, were taken into consideration by our specific body types, so that way this garden would work for us. Now, you might not be as crafty as my dad is, as my dad is the one who actually constructed this for us. We are super lucky to have someone with an engineering mind and an excess amount of energy that could construct this for us. If you are not so lucky, there are many kits available online, at your Big Lot stores. You can find them pretty much anywhere, of varying sizes and arrangements that will be suitable for your needs. Another thing to consider in your design process is materials. You want to make sure that the materials that you plan on using are something you can easily access and easily afford. Something as grand scale as this is going to cost you a pretty penny, so keep that in mind as you want to budget to make sure you don't overextend yourself. We used a combination of wood and metal sheeting. The metal sheeting was a primary part of our design process, as we knew it was not going to degrade, so it would last long term for us and we wouldn't have to re-establish that material. The wood that touches our raised garden bed is not pressure treated. This was done on purpose, as we didn't want to have any of the chemicals from pressure treating leaching into our soil and affecting our plants. So the boards that do not have direct contact with our soil are pressure treated, because we want those to last as long as possible without having the need to replace them. If you have access to recycled materials that you know are non-toxic, or if you have resources such as building companies or other things that you can get these at a discounted rate in a non-traditional manner, then that may help you on your costs. Speaking of cost, there is a hidden cost that you may not considered. as we didn't consider it as we were building our structure. We had this all done, we were super proud of how beautiful it was, and then we realized what kind of volume we needed to fill with a quality soil. This is very expensive, and if you make something as large as we did, with as much depth as you had to fill, the sticker shock is going to be real. So the method that we utilized in our particular raised garden bed is an adapted version of hugelkultur. And what that is, it's an old method of gardening where they use fallen limbs and other lumber to create a mound and then built up dirt on top of that. That lumber that's buried on the bottom will slowly degrade after time, replenishing the nutrients of your soil. But for us, it was really important because it's going to fill a lot of that void, and that way lowering our cost of the soil we had to add on top of it. A side note about soil and a raised garden bed, particularly if you build something as tall as we did, is figuring out how you're going to get that soil into the bed once your construction is complete. We had to create a ramp in this far corner back here, so that way we could wheelbarrow the dirt into our garden bed. If we had to manually shovel it from the floor into our bed, that would have taken far too long and would have been far too strenuous on the backs that we were trying to save by building this bed in the first place. So that leads me into labor. Labor is something you need to consider not only with the construction of your raised bed itself, but filling it with the dirt and then tending the plants that you intend on growing. If you don't have a lot of time to dedicate to those plants, then you're going to want to keep your raised garden bed plan to a smaller dimension. If you plan on making this be a primary resource for your food, then you're probably going to want to extend your space, and remember, that's going to extend your labor. The final design aspect that you want to think about, which is kind of tricky and really wasn't so much of an issue for us, but that's time of year. You want to make sure that if you're creating a raised garden bed, that you don't want to do it too much in the wintertime, particularly if you're dealing with snow and frost, is that's going to be a problem for you in construction. You also don't want to make it be in the midst of summer if you're living where we are, like in Florida, because that heat is just going to sap all your energy and not let you be as productive as you wish to be on your construction. The fifth thing to consider is problem solving. If you know what problems you may have before you even start, then you can create an environment that's going to solve some of those problems for you. As you can see, our entire raised garden is caged, and there's a reason for that. We have tons of wildlife in our area that want to eat our vegetables, and we don't want them to eat them, we want to eat them. So we've created this cage. We've tried a multitude of different variations, and this has been a work in progress, but we always knew we needed to have some means of enclosing our space to keep squirrels primarily, but also birds out, so that way our vegetables stay inside so we can eat them. Something you may want to think about is that when you keep the birds out, you are limiting your natural bug protection, as those birds would eat those bugs too, along with your vegetables. You also want to make sure whatever netting or material you're using to barricade out your unwanted pests is large enough to allow pollinators in. If you have a super fine mesh and you don't get any pollinators into your garden, you are causing some severe problems for yourself. Another important part of problem solving for me in particular is companion planting. I find that if I utilize companion planting methods in my gardening, that's going to solve a lot of the problems before they even occur. So in companion planting, you select plants that work well in the same environment as each other, but also benefit the plants. So here I have some herbs along with my peppers and my kale. I know that the herb's strong scent is going to repel many of the insects that want to eat my peppers and kale. And so I will have a lovely display of herbs, but I'll also have a protective aroma for my plants. So those are the 5 things that I think would really benefit you to consider before creating your raised garden bed. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please give me any comments or questions you have in the description below. I will have links for you and all the information that I've shared in a small synopsis. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on City Steading.